delighted to be here at the Renal Research Institute, talking about digital storytelling, increasing interest in live donor transplantation. I want to thank my supporters, the Terasaki Institute for Biomedical Innovation and One Lambda, a Thermo Fisher Scientific brand. I also want to thank a group of people that are so passionate about storytelling that they told their stories on the library that I'm about to talk about, and they also worked together to create a useful tool for providers. So for people who don't know me or the Transplant Research Education Center, my name is Amy Waterman, and I work at UCLA and the Terasaki Institute, and I work with a group of diverse researchers and innovators with a commitment to understand and overcome the critical modifiable barriers affecting transplant rates and outcomes. And the problems that we work on are the ones that everyone works on, actually, that are part of our field. And what I want to say is we talk about chronic kidney disease, but the word epidemic keeps getting louder and louder in the research articles, in the care that we provide. And I'm passionate about this cause because we're at a point now where they're saying this is a global health challenge. What can we do differently? How can we be innovative? And the reason that this is such a serious cause now is we have 37 million people with chronic kidney disease in the United States alone, and over 700,000 that have kidneys that don't work, requiring dialysis or deceased or living donor transplant. And if we say, I always think if this is my mother and we look at 5-year survival with end-stage renal disease, if she's able to get dialysis at one of our many great dialysis centers, the chance of her being alive is 42%, much better than if she didn't have dialysis. If she can get a deceased donor kidney transplant or a living donor kidney transplant, though, her chance of being alive after 5 years is 77% and 84%. So obviously, I really want my mother, at the moment that her kidneys fail, to think about whether she could get a transplant, whether it's from someone like me, her daughter, or from the waiting list. Unfortunately, if you look at the people who are receiving these different types of treatments, it's in the inverse relationship. You have only 21% of people who are getting a deceased donor transplant and only 8% who are getting a living donor transplant in the country. So there's really a sense for me, I'm an educator, fundamentally a patient advocate. We really need to make sure that at the moment that people's kidneys fail, they get to make an informed choice about what's best for them. If it's dialysis, that's great. But if they are interested in a deceased or a living donor transplant, we want to make sure they have the information and their family and friends have the information about living donation. The reason why is clear. If people who get this information and who decide to move forward with transplant, they can live 5 to 15 additional years of life if they're able to get a transplant versus staying on dialysis, which is the second column here. So the other part that I think is a very interesting thing, if you just look at our data, you have about 250 million adults in the United States. We have nearly 100,000 people who are on the waiting list waiting for one kidney. And if only less than 1% of those adults felt called, for a family or a friend or for somebody at their church or in their community to donate one kidney, we could literally eliminate the organ donor shortage. So this is one of the few solvable challenges, healthcare challenges that we have right now. And I think that that's exciting. It's hard to do. We all know it's hard to do, but by working together, we can. But one of the things I also want to show you is if you look at the number of people joining the waiting list, which is the green bar at the top, you can see that that number is increasing. But if you compare the number of people who were donating their 2 kidneys when they pass away, that's the orange line, you see that that's also going up over time. But the number of people who are donating 1 kidney when they're alive has been very stagnant since 2004. It's around 6,000 people, 6,000 to 6,500. And in California, where I am at UCLA, people are waiting almost 10 years for a deceased donor kidney. And remember, if you go back to the data that I was just showing you about 5-year survival, they're facing the chance that a matching kidney would not even come for them in time. So I want to help with you guys with the care that you're providing for the patients that you serve. I also want to point out an important barrier that is getting worse. So if you look at access to living donor kidney transplant since 1995, what you can see on the top is that the white patients have even more access as time progresses. So they have a better chance of getting a living donor kidney transplant. but all of our other racial or ethnic groups are having a worse chance than 1995. It's getting harder. So we need to try to stem the tide. We need to try to make sure that people know about this, and then they can make the best decision for them. The other part that keeps me up at night is that if you look at this list, this is 2019 data. So 95,000 people were on the waiting list, and 23,000 people, 401, maybe some people in your clinic, had a really good day that year where they got a call that said there's a matching kidney for you, come to the transplant center. But we can also see that 7,500 people passed away or became too sick to be able to be eligible for transplant anymore. So what I want to say is, for some of our patient groups, even people who are healthy enough that a transplant could help them, the road ahead is closed. So who is not or may not be benefiting from transplant right now? I bet these are people that you can see a patient when I talk to you about this. People with poor knowledge about transplant, those who have a lot of questions or fears, or who think a myth is true about transplant, those who don't have a car or access to a transplant center to learn, those who don't have enough bandwidth to have a complex transplant evaluation by telehealth, those who don't know how to ask to find living donors, those who have mistrust to their own doctors, those who've never met anyone who's had a transplant before, a living donor, a person who's had a transplant, those who speak languages other than English, those who had a crash start onto dialysis where they didn't have time to prepare and think about transplant before their kidneys failed. What about family members and friends? Do they know fully that they could be living donors? And what about people just generally in the community that may not know anything about living donation, may not even know someone in need of a transplant, but might consider donating if they could? So knowing that those are groups that are more likely to be left out, there was an executive order on advancing American kidney health that came out last year. And this order stood for about 4 important things. So this is now a national set of priorities. We want to prevent end-stage kidney disease, period. And I am in 100% support of this. Let's not have anyone meet us at the dialysis clinics or the transplant clinics. We also want to increase informed patient choice about treatments that are better for patients, cheaper for the government, than the ESRD costs that we have, so that they're making better choices. 2 of those are dialysis at home and transplant, which are actually cheaper than in-center dialysis. Finally, we want to double the number of kidneys available for transplant by 2030. Now, I'm a big patient advocate. I said that at the beginning. And there's a practical reason and a passionate reason. The passionate reason is clear, right? We want patients to make the best decisions for them. I know a lot about transplant and dialysis, but I don't know what's right for one patient. But the second part is, research shows that when patients are highly engaged in their care, they're going to make choices and take actions that improve their health outcomes. A passive patient is less powerful than an active, engaged patient. And I was really proud of this article that came out last year. And the reason why is because the majority of authors on this paper are patients themselves, people who've had transplants. And we said, what do we want to do? What are the priorities that the healthcare professionals may not know that the patients want to make sure we emphasize? And this is what they said. So this comes from our patient community. So the patient said, we want to teach providers to acknowledge us as active participants in creating our own care plan. We want to provide enough time. This feels very true for the transplant conversations that I have, so that we can ask questions, so can potential donors, and we can be connected with advocates who've already done this so we can learn. We need information in mobile-friendly technology. It's not just that we talk to you and trust you and don't have the information we need. We want to go home. We want to take it home. We want to talk to our family and friends. We need help. How do we bring up the possibility of living donation with our family and friends? How do we ask? And then finally, we need to develop awareness campaigns to help the public know there is a kidney shortage and that living donation can help. So I love these. These are calls to action for me from our patients. And I've been talking about this a lot in the course of my 20 years doing this work. And what I really feel is it's much better if we work together than if we work in our individual silos. So we need an education pipeline, in my opinion. We need to be having general transplant information that's publicly available in trusted websites, And it's available to patients, to people whose kidneys are still working, to people who are planning on what they're going to do when their kidneys fail, and also to potential living donors and family members. We then need to have aligned information in dialysis centers and in nephrologist offices, so that as people are starting to have conversations in CKD 3 and 4, they're getting transplant information there as well that's consistent. And then now, as their kidneys move into ESRD or full kidney failure, they're then getting information at the start of transplant evaluation, maybe as they're getting on the deceased donor waiting list, but that this information keeps getting repeated as they're waiting, and it's shared with potential donors as well. And then finally, after they get a transplant, they're getting optimal education about adherence and post-transplant information so that they can keep their kidney as long as possible, hopefully forever. So to me, this is a perfect world. What it would look like would be something like this. A patient would find out they're having kidney problems. They would have really excellent health literate, validated information that they can trust, that things that they can take home with their family at large. They can talk about it. They can talk about potential living donation in their home. Then we have dialysis providers who are checking in with them and saying, okay, now that you're here, let's not leave out the decision-making about transplant to see if you're interested in getting referred, especially within the first year, where you have the highest chance of having the best outcome. And then finally, if you go into a transplant center, you're getting a complex information here, hopefully with family and friends present. So why do I feel this way? It's not just that I'm passionate about this, it's actually that this helps patients be successful. So this is a study that we had published this year called Your Path to Transplant. It was a randomized controlled trial looking at could we systematize education to help patients more successfully get waitlisted and pursue living donation. And I want to show you, first of all, we talked about the racial disparities that are present, and I want to make the point at UCLA as well. So if we say right now, the patients that are walking into transplant centers are the best prepared, right? They are motivated to do this. They took the time, they got in their car, they showed up for their appointment. What you can see if you look here is just look at the white patients. They were only able to answer 51% of the transplant questions correctly. And even the white patients were half or less likely to have read information, watched videos, or talked to people they trusted about living donation at start. So there's a lot more that can be happening at the dialysis center level to make sure people are more engaged. But then if you look at the red columns, you can really see it's even worse for the Black and the Hispanic patients. Only 15% of the Hispanic patients had read information or watched videos. And these are the people that showed up at the transplant center, let alone the people who had ruled it out or were fearful about it. So we have a lot of room, and it's not about dialysis or nephrology offices. It's about all of us working together to build this pipeline of information. What I want to show you, though, that's hopeful is when we provide tailored information over 8 months at a transplant center, the green line is the tailored information we provided. Patients' knowledge went up significantly more than information they just received at the transplant center 1 or 2 times. They also began taking really crucial actions to improve their health, which included asking potential donors to be tested, giving potential donors the transplant center number, asking people to tell others. So this is one where you have an advocate, like a wife starts getting the word out for her husband and sharing their need with a large community on Facebook. So the thing to note is transplant pursuit was higher in general. So 8 months later, people were more likely to be waitlisted and to pursue living donation if they had received Your Path to Transplant. So I also want to talk about racial disparity. So I'm a geek with data. So let me share something in a simple way about what I think is important. So the racial disparity. And I don't just want to say there is a disparity and then let's stop. I want to figure out what is modifiable that we can do something at a care level to make a difference. So when you say there's a racial difference, and people say, why is there a difference between Hispanics and African Americans and white patients? Sometimes people say, well, it's really not about race. It's about employment and insurance variation, which can make sense, right? Their education is less. This is what people say. I'm not aligning on anyone. I just want to introduce the arguments. So maybe it's something about the socioeconomic status of people. Other people say, no, it's that they don't really have what they need. They don't have a relationship with their doctors that they can trust. They have fewer people who will caregive for them if they need help, to get them to the transplant center, ask questions. It's a psychosocial issue. Okay, maybe. And then other people say, you know what, I don't think that these patient groups are prepared in the same way. They're not as knowledgeable. They're not as ready to pursue living donation, even if they go forward. And maybe it's a combination of these, what's called a parsimonious model. So here's what I want to show you. So what we see at UCLA is that non-white patients are 3.2 times less likely to get a living donor kidney. And this isn't about UCLA. This is at every transplant center in the country. There's a disparity like this, so that we need to do something about this. And everyone needs to be aware. So if you control for socioeconomic status variables, employment, insurance, and education, you see that the disparity, the red line at the top, starts going down. This is a good thing. So now when you control for who has private insurance and who doesn't, you have the disparity goes from 3.2 to 2.6. So that we're reducing it. In a perfect world, the disparity would be 0. So we want it to go down. If you control for people's caregivers, how many caregivers came forward at evaluation, you make an additional drop. And if you control for how prepared people are, again, it even goes down further. In looking at the strongest model, and I won't go into the statistical work of this, but I want you to trust me, you can reduce the disparity from 3.2 to 2.2 if you control for 3 things. If they had private insurance or not, how many caregivers they had at evaluation, and whether they had shared education with others. Now, what does this mean clinically? It's a lot of statistics, but does it give us a path for intervention? In my opinion, it does. Let me show you why. The people who are walking into our transplant centers right now who don't have someone standing beside them are less likely to ultimately get a living donor transplant. And people who are not going home afterwards or going home before and talking to their family members about living donation and could anyone be a donor for them, those are the ones that are less likely. So if we can increase either of those behaviors with the patient communities that we serve, we can make a difference and a dent in the disparity. So let's think about this. So let me shift a little bit, but I want to ask you this question. I want you to think about it for a second. Where do people first hear about living donation in the world now? So if I say to you, don't think about dialysis and transplant, but like if you're just someone in the world, where do you think people hear about it? You could think that they hear about it in like a focus group like this or a talk. So like they're sitting around at their church and they start talking about this, or they meet someone like me who talks about living donation a lot. Well, unfortunately, that's not true. Where people are more likely to hear about living donation is on shows like Grey's Anatomy. It makes sense, right? Like when you think about it, that, how many times have you all heard and maybe watched a show where living donation, transplant, dialysis, people running with ice and buckets, with a kidney in there, getting on a plane. We've seen that as part of our culture, right? So I also wanted to tell you, just in case you're not aware, there's actually a new show that's come out called Be Positive. It's a show about living donation. And the premise is the guy in the gray cardigan, he finds out he needs a kidney and he's a divorced father. And the woman in the red cardigan, she is a high school friend, a little bit ditzy. And she says, I'll donate to you. And so the show's called Be Positive. It's a comedy by the people from The Big Bang Theory. But the idea is that they are showing the reality of this. Now, here's what I would say. On one side, 3 million people watched the pilot of this. So in terms of increasing awareness of this cause, to get 3 million eyes, especially people from that 250 million adults that we talked about, that's really great. But do we think that the Big Bang Theory is going to be the optimal educational program such that all of us can just go home and not have this conversation? I don't know how you guys feel, but I don't even watch the shows because they're often, basically they look for, in this case, the comedy of our field, which isn't a bad thing, but also in the case of dramas like Grey's Anatomy, the worst case scenarios, so that can increase drama. So the key here is, I think this is a great awareness approach. But I also think that there's concerns about using this as the way that we're getting out the messaging about our cause. But both of them are part of getting general transplant information to public and potential living donors. Let me talk to you about some other ways that we're doing it, though, too. So I actually spoke at the White House. President Obama had an organ donation summit in 2006 where we said we are going to set up a learning center so that people could search for our learning center. This is now publicly available. So if you want to go to the UNOS Kidney Transplant Learning Center, it's a clearinghouse of educational resources for patients, living donors, and the interested public. And it is all about ensuring equity to access of information. So I wanted to say those blue curtains are the blue curtains where President Obama and President Trump do speak sometimes. So that was a definite thrill. The other part, just to give you a feel of what it looks like, you can go here and you have health literate information about the different choices, including dialysis. And it helps people who are interested in this go to a trusted universal website. So there isn't a particular, it isn't referring to one transplant center. Another resource that I developed that's publicly available is called My Transplant Coach. And what we know is, since there's people that are scared about transplant centers, it seems like a really big deal for them. Also, there are people that can't read very well, don't like to read. This is a video. It's an animated video where you meet a woman on the left who is basically meets the people that are on the right. They're all different people who are learning about transplant and whether they would do this. You meet living donors, and she goes through and she talks about the fundamentals, the positive things to consider. This also allows a person to put in their data, and for people like them, it isn't a particular output for this one patient, but for a patient who has diabetes, a patient who's 55, et cetera. Here are the different types of deceased donor kidneys that you can get and living donation, and to see which ones would help you live the longest. All of this content can then be emailed to the patient, and then they can take this to their doctors for discussion. So I've been doing these kind of educational innovations for a while, but I always think, can I go outside the box? What am I missing? How do we honor all the good stuff that we know is there and do a great job? So I want to highlight something that a friend of mine named Andy Cameron at Johns Hopkins helped to create, because it's got me thinking. So Andy said, you know what, all of the general educational resources, like the ones that I mentioned, are great. But it gets to a point where someone's getting pretty serious about living donation. And they're like, you know what, give me some ability to do this well. We need skill building. We need resources so that we can help and ask other people if they would be my donor. So Andy made this app, which guys can go to as well. And this is a smartphone app where you go through and you say, I'm a recipient, a champion, meaning like a wife of a donor or a recipient or something, or a donor themselves. And I want to create a post. So, I'm going to create a post on, I need a kidney or I need a liver. And they would say, they basically start typing in information. So I'm Amy and I have a cat and I'm newly married and I'd really love to, for you to think about donating to me. And this post would then go onto Facebook and Instagram. And if you'd be willing to donate, please let me know. And it would go to the community of that particular person. And there's fabulous news. Compared to people who didn't have this app, people who use this app were 6.61 times more likely to have a donor come forward on their behalf. So getting tools about asking is very important for people who are interested. For people who are learning generally, you might want to introduce earlier, generally educational kind of resources. But when you get to the point where you're serious, you need tools. The only concern for me is that it leaves out a lot of people, to write a post, will you be my donor, is very, very far along the readiness continuum. So it leaves out a lot of early stage learners. It also leaves out people who are not writers. But it gets me thinking. So we know that storylines on Grey's Anatomy make a difference, and we know that apps that have tools make a difference. So could we, by any chance, combine first-person storytelling to improve health in a different way than this app? So I want to talk about storytelling as a resource for clinical care and clinical education for a second. So you're like, okay, well, what's traditional education? Well, traditional education would be something that, was very formal. It was led by providers, factual. It's sometimes health literate. It goes through, here's all the facts about transplant and living donation And the provider is the authority delivering information. Now compare that to stories. So in stories, you would have something like a patient who has already gotten a transplant would tell their story about this experience. It would be informal. It would present the experience. It would, by its very nature, be health literate, because a story is health literate. And the authority is the person who looks like me. It isn't the doctor in the white coat. It's the patient who lived through it. It's the donor who did it. And now, could adding storytelling to traditional educational methodologies make any difference? What I am so excited by is that you can actually see health differences. We did a scoping review, and people found that when you added storytelling to traditional education, patients were more, had better self-efficacy, meaning better understanding and empowerment on how to take care of their diabetes. We had reductions in blood pressure because people began probably taking the recommendations of the patients who were talking about what they did to reduce their blood pressure. And they nearly doubled the vaccination rates in one study when people added storytelling to work with vaccinations. So what's interesting is storytelling can really matter. And I think we get it. You know, for any woman who's had a baby and who has talked to another woman ahead of time and said, what's it really like? How bad is the pain? What should I do to prepare myself? All of those things. We know that those stories are as important as the practical experiences and training that you're getting as a new mom. The other part I want to say is why storytelling works is pretty simple. It gets people curious and it's gentle. I think that we often, when we talk about transplant, it can come from a place of, you should get a transplant, you will be alive. It has a good heart to it, but for people who aren't ready, that's really too much. But if you say, would you like to watch a story about somebody who's gotten a transplant or a donor who has donated a kidney, people find that less pressuring. Storytelling is also extremely empowering to the storytellers themselves. I think often we think we know what patients need to learn and what donors need to share. What we have seen with storytelling is this gets us out of the way. We just have the storytellers share what they think is important, and it's peer-to-peer education. And we know with support groups, that's also extremely powerful. It also allows the value of emotion. I think there's nothing more powerful when you see somebody lit up on the other side of a transplant talking about how their life is changed and improved, or you see the gratitude, or you see the worry, and then you see the change. So I want to say that that's possible with storytelling. And finally, it culturally grounds messages and experiences. When you see somebody who talks in who has a background in it looks like a house you might be living in, who uses the slang you use, who, like maybe who speaks in Spanish versus in English. All of this brings trust, brings the reality that transplant's possible for everybody. So let me show you what we did. We created a living donation storytelling project. We started this in 2019 in the US, and we started it in 2020 in Canada. So we'd love to keep expanding it. And we first wondered if anybody would ever tell a story in a digital storytelling library, which, this is a personal, vulnerable time. So we did a study just to understand who might tell their stories. And we selected storytellers, and we invited them to share their story using open-ended prompts. We didn't want to control what they shared, but we wanted to give them a little bit of start. So we asked them to talk about what kind of questions they had, risks and benefits, challenges, how they overcame them, how their life had changed. And they gave us a post survey about what it was really like for them. So let me show you what they did. So right now, this is publicly available. You can go to explorelivingdonation.org, and anyone can film their story. And people sign up, and they get 17 questions where they pick a question that they themselves want to talk about. So if you look at the top, you'd say something like, "Hi, I'm Amy, and I donated a kidney to my dad about 6 years ago." That's not really a question. What starts happening, though, is you have questions that they choose that they want to share about. And they talk about the best moment after my surgery, or they talk about what I was most scared about. And they pick these questions, they film on either their cell phone or on a camera like this, like the one that I'm filming on right now. And then when they finish answering the question, they decide whether they want to move on to the next question or refilm that little part of the video. At the end, all of the small parts, they splice together to form a seamless video that's been approved by the patient that is a representation of what they want to share. And then it can be posted in a lot of different ways. So let me show you kind of what it looks like from the patient side. So here are 3 real people sitting at their houses. If you look at what's behind them, telling their story. Luther donated his kidney to his daughter, who's sitting in his lap as he tells his story. The other part that I am sure you'd be worried about, we were also worried about, is what happens if there's somebody revealing maybe PHI information or something that's medically incorrect. So we completed an ethical review to make sure that there were not PHI information revealed, something like last name or transplant center. We removed any sensitive material. If anybody was pressuring, we didn't have this very often, but if somebody said, you have to do it, you're bad if you don't, we would remove that little clip. We would try to keep the integrity of the video, but we felt this should be a without pressure, medically accurate, HIPAA protected library. And then we uploaded the stories on the website itself. Another thing I love about this library is you can actually sort this library by gender, location, race, ethnicity, story type. You can look at donor stories by themselves. So these are all people who have donated a kidney to somebody. We have people who have received a kidney who are talking about their gratitude and their challenges with this. And we have people who are talking about, I need a kidney. So this is a part of the library that's similar to the app that I mentioned before, that people could, they can come on here and they could say, I'm Kabir, and let me tell you what my challenges are. And if you'd be willing to donate to me, I would be incredibly grateful. You can hear these stories now if you go to the library. These stories can then be shared to Facebook, Instagram, and all of that, similar to the app itself. It also lets people find a transplant center near them if they want to donate or if they want to go forward for transplant. And I thought it would probably be great for you to see what the video is about. So you can see the kind of just small pieces of gold that have been showing up on these videos. So here they are.
My name is Katie Walker.
Hello, my name is Richard Hicks.
My name is Matt Ronan.
My name is Susie.
Emily.
My name is Diane.
And I donated a kidney to my cousin.
And I donated my kidney to my brother Carl.
I donated a kidney to a stranger.
I had the honor of donating my kidney to my daughter Monica. She was 3 years old at the time.
I was motivated to donate a kidney to my brother because of, 1, what he was going through, and 2, that my brother needed a hero.
It was really powerful. It was a powerful moment to see somebody go from so sick to looking so much better in such a short period of time.
It was, words just can't describe it. She just and her color was back, and she looked so good.
The best moment after my surgery was on a Saturday. My brother came downstairs. I was eating breakfast and kind of doing my thing, and he said, bro, guess what? And I said, what? And he said, I don't have to go to dialysis.
I would just encourage you to remember that a very short interruption in your life, a matter of days or weeks, can make the difference in the rest of someone else's life.
When I ultimately decided to donate my kidney, I knew that it was more than just donating an organ. It was actually saving a life, and a life of somebody that I truly care for and love. So it was, no questions asked. I was like, let's do it. My life has actually changed tremendously. I feel like when you step up to the plate, when God's calling on you, blessings just flow. Everything's been moving in the right direction. I'm extremely thankful for my decision and have no regret.
I received a living kidney donation from my mom. After the surgery, I was excited to once again be able to swim and have baths and be able to eat whatever I wanted. But I think the one thing that I was most excited about was just to be around family as long as I could, and to be able to actually stay awake for all of the things that I had been too tired to do before.
It got really scary for me when I was denied to donate my kidney to my husband. I knew we had only one choice, and that was to start telling people outside our family, telling the world that you or a family member needs an organ is not an easy thing to do. People literally from all corners of the globe enroll at my husband's transplant center to help him. It was restoration in humanity with the click of one button.
At the age of 36, I was diagnosed with stage 5 kidney failure, and I had to be put on dialysis right away.
What I want more than anything is to find someone who will be generous enough to donate a kidney so that I may be able to not live off of a machine, as well as to have a child.
I love those stories. So I want to talk about what I see for clinicians utilizing this library. I think you can see how powerful those stories are and how certain stories would touch certain patients in terms of where they are in their own journey. And I want to say, first of all, these are all publicly available for you to utilize them for any clinical needs you have. I also want to show you what the storytellers said about their experience. So I want to invite you to add more stories to this library, particularly people in need of a kidney. It would be amazing to have more of those stories. It also would be amazing to have the success stories of people from your dialysis center who have gotten transplants so that you have those to share with your other patients. So here's what I have learned about doing the stories. You're like, could I tell a story? So here's the reality. These stories are about 11 minutes long on the library itself. They take about an hour to film, though, because people get prepared and they maybe reshoot certain parts of the story. We asked people how hard or easy it was. In general, people said it was a little bit hard and a little bit easy. There was emotionality to it. People have told me that this is a hard time. So talking about this moment of time is hard. Also, sometimes the practicality of technology is hard. We all know that now that we're living on Zoom. But why these good people want to share their stories is fundamentally they want to educate others and they want to help more people become donors. So I think that that's really beautiful. I also want to give you some data. This is fun. We're now looking at the content about what is shared. And we had people code the videos and talk about the kind of feel of the videos. And I've shown you some pieces so you can decide for yourself what you felt. But the transplant patients in general, they're saying these are engaging, positive, inspiring, and emotional stories. Same for the donors. I also want to talk about what people commonly shared about. So what you hear when you go to these stories, you hear that people pursued living donation because of having better outcomes. They talk about physically, the changes, feeling poorly before transplant, how things changed after. They talked about the impact of dialysis on their life and wanting to get out of dialysis, and a lot of gratitude and relief afterwards. I also found it's interesting to look at the emotional journey of patients. So they actually spoke about all of the different phases where when they found out they had kidney failure and were on dialysis, to learning they needed a transplant, to finding a donor right before surgery and afterwards. And what you can see as you go from left to right is a shift emotionally in how they're feeling. So you see that there's a lot of fear and anxiety happening at the early part. And this is a shift then, and you see by the end, there's happiness, relief, and hope. When looking at the living donor side of things, donors shared commonly about how they wanted their recipient to live longer. They felt really sad knowing that the person was in need of a transplant, and they felt, very motivated because it was the right thing to do and to do good and to give back. They also talked about what they got out of it. I think sometimes we talk about living donors are heroes and they don't get value. A lot of the sharing of the living donors is about they felt grateful for the experience of being a donor, fulfilled from doing this, and so happy to see the recipient doing well. They also talked a lot about family and friends being involved. This isn't just a single person's decision. I think we all know that. We talked, a lot of the sharing talks about family and friends and how critical they were to recovery, to supporting them, and even the family's worries about the donor and the recipient. And donors, how did donors shift? So when they found out that they were a match, they were really happy at the start, but got really happy after they donated. So you can see here, there's happiness, relief, and hope shared all the way across. I also think it's great both for the recipients and the donors. They had anxiety, you know, going under the knife. So you can see an honest sharing of the experience. So just by listening to one of these stories, a couple of these stories, you can get this feel. All right, so what is the Living Donation Storytelling Project, and how would you like to be a part to use this as a resource? So the first thing that we're doing is we're building the stories. So I wanted to invite you, if talking about this gets you excited and you want to partner with us, we are so grateful. We want to include 500 diverse stories in the library. All people have to do is go to explorelivingdonation.org and they can start telling their story. So we invite you to send people that you care about, that have an amazing story, that have a normal story, doesn't have to even be amazing. The second part is send people to this technology to help them tell their own story and help them spread the word to find a donor. We're also launching a media campaign to seeking more living donors. I'll tell you something about that. So you might be seeing this in your feed. And I just want to invite you to play with us. So we've been doing a lot of work to understand effective media campaigns to change health. And we talked about how would we find more potential living donors. And there's really 3 groups of people. And this first group is not who we're looking for. They're people, if I said, would you ever be a living donor? They're like, you know, probably not. I'll do good in other ways. We honor that. We're not trying to pressure those people. But there's 2 other groups of people. You know, I'd consider donating a kidney to a family member or a friend if they were in need, those kind of people. And then there are people who say, you know, I'd consider donating a kidney to anyone because it fits into my spiritual or worldview. There are more people like that for sure. There's 700,000 people who have kidneys that don't work, 37 million people who have people in their lives whose kidneys are problematic. If we can just find them and help them learn, that's amazing. So what we're doing is we're targeting people, and you know how you get sometimes like you search on a site for a pair of pants and then the pair of pants appears in other sites that you go to for a while. We're doing the same things where people who are searching and who are looking for a kidney, who have donated a kidney, who've received a kidney, providers, coordinators, dialysis professionals, potential donors. Based on search terms, we're actually locating people and we're sending content, videos. So the small videos at the end of the that you saw with the spiraling colors, those are now going out monthly, and we're placing 90,000 still ads and 40,000 videos in social media, Facebook, Instagram, online. And we're learning which ones have people open them, go to the website, share their stories. So we're really excited by that. So these are the kind of ads that might appear. If you see these, they're coming from my research team. And if you could see here, here's Yahoo. So this is where the ads would go above and beside, like whatever the content is. Here's an Instagram feed where you might get a display ad or you might get a video. And this video could come into the clip. And what I think is interesting, we've been doing this for a month now, and normally it makes sense. You get so many ads, we're all bombarded, that the click rate's actually 0.05%, so less than 1% for any ad or video you get. But when we send these videos forward, we're getting a 2.1 and 2.5% click rate for people that are potential donors and people seeking living donor transplants. So we're figuring out how to find people and how to send the truth of our field to people so that more people consider it. And it's been fun. We get to look at lots of geeky data about marketing data. So more to come on that. But in summary, here's what I want to leave you with. There, 100,000 generous people donating one kidney could solve the kidney donor shortage. The Living Donation Storytelling Project can serve as a public resource to inspire and educate. Please use it. It's yours. And large-scale media campaigns sharing these stories can reach more potential donors and people in need of a transplant to hopefully decrease the needs for kidney nationwide. I'll leave you with this quote from a patient advocate. Please let patients help improve healthcare. Let patience help steer our decisions, strategic and practical. Let patience help define what value in medicine is. I want to thank you all and invite you to go to this website to share stories and refer patients seeking living donors. Thank you so much.